Hello and welcome back to the Stronghold. I'm the Magi, and thus far I have been overwhelmingly positive about the Foundation set, its longevity, the stability of it all, the impact for us budget, free-to-play style players. But the reality is not every card in the set is good. So I have pulled together a veritable expert pool when it comes to traps, and we're going to talk about the 12 trap cards that I think are really laying in wait for us budget players within Foundations and why we should avoid those. But before we get into all that, I'm sure you know that the 5-year Foundation set in Standard is going to change a lot of things, not just in Standard, but in particular for budget and free-to-play players. What you may not know is you can make a big impact around here by making a funding choice through our Patreon, whether you're just helping keep the lights on every month, or you're making contributions towards specific content or hardware upgrades. Just know all the Patreon funding goes back into the community. Now, what were we talking about? Oh yeah, right. So guys, before we get started, I want to be 100% clear here. I'm not saying that these cards can't ever be fun or that the decks built around them can't ever work. But the reality is I am calling them traps because more often than not, you are going to spend resources on these and ultimately, more than likely, tend to regret it later. Alright, so let's get into this, and I think we need to start things off at number 12 with the entire mono blue draw 2 archetype. And hey, Trapmaster, why don't you start things off here?
I lay this card face down on the field and end my turn.
Well, Trapmaster, that's not exactly insightful. Don't you have anything else to add?
You triggered my trap card!
Dude, that's not even the same voice. Listen, I tell you what, how about you finish your bagel and then just take your Yu-Gi-Oh ass on out of my office, huh? Alright, so why is this entire archetype just a trap? Despite it having a strong jump-in packet contributing to it, and strong commons and uncommons like Erudite Wizard and the Mischievous Mystic, the archetype still comes up kind of short for us budget players, and it really comes down to one thing. However, the third piece of the budget powerhouse, the Clinquant Sky Mage, a 4-mana 1/1 with flying, and whenever you draw a card, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. It's just too far off the mark for its base stats. Playing a 1/1 for 4 mana puts you pretty far behind early in the game, and on turn 4 you don't have any mana left to draw additional cards, and you've already drawn for the turn. So you've got to wait to untap with this before it gets any better, and then it progresses just too slowly, even if you devote all of your mana the next turn to drawing additional cards. Overall, this piece is just an absolute hindrance, and until we get another budget-friendly enabler here to replace this entire archetype is just going to be underwhelming and not worth our time or resources. Moving on, at number 11, we've got Swiftfoot Boots, which may come as a bit of a surprise for some of you. Admiral, why don't you tell us about this card?
It's a trap!
Okay, sure, it definitely is a situational card, but perhaps you could elaborate just a bit more.
It's a trap!
Oh boy, this is going to be one of those days, isn't it? Alright, so Swiftfoot Boots is definitely a commander staple, and if that's your approach to Magic, you're going to have very different feelings about this card. But often using it in Constructed, it's just a little bit too slow, and certainly in Limited, it doesn't make your mediocre or even bad creatures any better. You've got to have a good creature to make this a good card. And, well, that just doesn't happen as often as we would like it to. Oh, and Admiral, the Rebel Command just contacted our producers, and they said something about another moon in orbit around Endor, and they'd like you to check it out right away.
It's a trap!
You know what, buddy? It might be. You stay safe out there. Moving on to number 10, we've got Alicia, who laughs at fate, and this card was part of the starter deck previews for next year. This certainly can't be a trap. Mr. Kwan, why don't you let us know why you put this card on the list?
I keep telling you, you listen me more, you live longer.
Boy, when you are right, you are right. There really is no place for a 3-mana X2 creature in Standard right now. There's just too much good removal that costs less than 3 mana. And while Alicia could affect the board the turn it comes down, if you had other creatures to attack with, it really doesn't get stronger in its own right until you've untapped and attacked with it. And while this card's shortcomings are somewhat mitigated in a commander-based format like Brawl or Standard Brawl, there's just really no place for it in 60-card constructed Standard right now. Number 9 is Hitsagu's second Rite, and I just can't help but feel like this card is Wong more than it's right.
Not very funny.
Okay, admittedly, not my best joke, but you have to admit this card is going to spend more time in your hand as a dead card than times that it will actually be useful, much less win you the game. At number 8, Banner of Kinship looks like it's going to be a really strong tribal card. How do you feel about it?
3 aces. I win. 2 more games. I have all your money. Ha ha ha.
Yeah, I think that's another strong insight. Banner of Kinship really ends up being one of those win more cards. For 5 mana, it basically just makes all your existing creatures a little bit better, but if you had enough creatures to win the game after Banner of Kinship, you probably had enough beforehand. The one spot that I think maybe Banner of Kinship maybe finds a place, but whether it's actually worth it or not remains to be seen, is in a post-Wrath situation where you got down Banner of Kinship, they Wrath, nuked all your creatures, and now any creature that you play is still a solid threat. But again, outside of that situation, it is probably strictly a win more card. The number 7 entry, Lateral Blade of the Elves, does seem to be the centerpiece of many elf builds, and the primary reason to go Golgari over mono green. What would you have to say about this, Mr. Kwan?
Hey lady, you call him Dr. Jones.
Solid point. The moniker here really isn't what's important. And most budget players would simply be better off dropping this card, dropping black mana from the deck list, and just going with a straight mono-green aggro deck. You're going to get more wins for less investment. Number 6, we've got Quill Greatworm, a card that has been absolutely beloved by the Timmy players out there. Mr. Kwan, what would you say to those Timmy players?
You know nuts. He's crazy.
Yep, I simply couldn't agree more. This card, while very aggressively costed at 6 mana for a 7/7 with trample, its abilities on the card that make it a mythic just really aren't very mythic worthy. The first one is a classic win more, making your big Timmy creatures even bigger. And the second ability is, well, very hard to activate. How many times are you really going to be taking counters off of creatures? And you still have to pay the mana cost again. You are so right. At number 6, Massacre Worm really is no fun, at least once you've played it once or twice, and you start to realize that there is just better things that you could be doing with 6 mana in black. Different worm, similar issue. At number 4, Dragoncaller got an unbelievable amount of hype in the preseason, but really hasn't done very much. Mr. Kwan, what do you feel like is going on here with Dragoncaller?
He likes older women.
You know, I think that's a very good point. This card just has some growing up to do. Not only does it just not quite do enough as a rare in your deck, the blue-based Spells Matter deck that it's obviously meant for just isn't very well developed in Standard. It is notoriously hard to figure out and balance correctly. Maybe in time, Dragoncaller will have an opportunity to shine, but for right now, I think it's a developmental trap. Number 3 is a real mischief maker in Omniscience. So what are your immediate thoughts on this card?
Hey, you cheat, Dr. Jones, you cheat. Beautiful card.
True. This card is very cheaty, but most importantly, if you've been able to play this card with actual mana and didn't cheat it out, what are the odds that, one, you still have other cards in your hands worth playing, or that you couldn't just pay mana for those cards? So the idea here is you need a way to cheat Omniscience out, and, well, those don't always go to plan. At number 2, everybody had to know Thousand Year Storm was going to be on this list. At 6 mana, it has all the problems of Dragoncaller and Omniscience combined. It's the classic win more once in a while, whereas if you just built a similar deck without it, might still not be great, but it would be better.
It's a trap!
Number 9 is Hitsagu's second Rite, and I just can't help but feel like this card is Wong more than it's right. And last and arguably least, we have the Demonic Pact Harmless Offering combo, which is really fun the first time, and, well, it can get old quick. What do you think, Mr. Quan?
Wow, holy smoke. Very funny.
Exactly, and by the time you realize that this deck isn't as fun as you thought it would be and you're kind of growing out of it, those wild cards are already gone. And let's face it, we're talking about 4 mythics and 4 rares, plus whatever else the deck needs to make it function. So there we go, guys. Those are our thoughts on the biggest traps in Foundations, and even if you do end up with a couple random copies on these, they're probably not worth building around, even if they're not costing you immediate wildcards. My advice is just to stay away from these. And before we go, while every member of this community is important to me, I just wanted to take a moment and give a shout out to those patrons providing financial support and keeping the Stronghold from being a complete financial black hole. And of course, let me leave you with some suggestions for your next step here on the channel.